I guess it's time for us to revisit the RX 6500 XT. A lot of people dislike this card, and if you're thinking of maybe buying this card because it's available right now in the used marketplace, is this actually worth considering? So we're going to look at this card and play this in our multiplayer fast-paced shooters which demand a lot of speed and response time. And while we're at it, we're also going to compare it against its predecessor, which is the RX 5500 XT. Now, let's see if this is actually an upgrade to that one, which maybe you know. But the RX 5500 XT is very common in the used marketplace as well. And you can even purchase this in AliExpress, which is the sponsor of this video. So if you head down to AliExpress, they've got a sale ongoing, and you can buy the RX 5500 XT. Likewise, if you want a best value processor, that's the Ryzen 5600, which you could also purchase. You can key in the codes right here, which will give you extra discount. Okay, enough of that. Let's start with the games. Then, as always, we have run our games for at least 30 minutes before we started recording for our benchmark test. First up is Warzone, and here we have running competitive settings at 1080p. This isn't actually bad. We're running about 100 FPS when low is at around 80. Let's see if we can bump our FPS by activating FSR 3 upscaling, and here we have FSR 3. We're approximately gaining about 20 FPS more compared to our native. However, you do have to sacrifice visibility with FSR 3 or any upscaling, especially at 1080p. So I guess we'll probably have to stick with native in this one. And on an actual game, we do get about maybe a little bit lower FPS. Yeah, especially when there's a lot of smokes and a lot of effects there. Our FPS do drop around 80. Frame rates are pretty good though. In the Gulag, it's quite good as well. Look at that one, right? We get about 100 FPS. Pretty stable. It's actually come a long way. I think this isn't really bad with our RX 6500 XT. We are definitely able to hit the shots. Our VRAM is around at 3 gigabytes. The GPU power is only about 75, 77 watts, which isn't bad at all. Temperatures is pretty cool as well, 60 watts. Moving on to our next game, which is Apex Legends, and here you can see indoors, it's actually pretty good as well. We're getting about 150, 160 FPS indoors, which isn't actually bad. Obviously, we are GPU bound in here with our RX 6500 XT. Outdoors, we do have some drops on our FPS, especially when we are in here with a lot of lights, a lot of effects. However, it's pretty good and stable. That's just why I like this game. The stability is just really good. GPU power is around about 80 watts as well. And we've also almost maxed out our VRAM in here. We did set it up to medium on our textures. Moving on to our next game, which is everyone's favorite building game, Fortnite. And here we have performance mode. Obviously, you have to run performance mode with our RX 6500 XT. Yeah, GPU bound in here, about 90-95% utilization with our GPU. And look at that FPS, boys, 300 plus FPS. The lows are pretty stable too. This is actually a pretty good experience. I think Fortnite has also improved. I'm not seeing more frequent frame time spikes in here. GPU power is around 80-90 watts. The VRAM utilization is only about 2 gigabytes with our RX 6500 XT. And for those who are curious on the different APIs with Fortnite, here you can see all three of them. And this is very interesting. Obviously, we got performance mode, which is leading on all our frame rates in here. Lows are pretty good with our performance mode as well. We're all GPU bound in here. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how our RX 6500 XT performs against the RX 5500 XT, the predecessor, later on. And before we proceed, guys, if you enjoy the content that you're seeing in here, please hit that like button. It really does help us a lot. Okay, let's move on to the next game. And this one's one of our lighter games, which is Valorant. So Valorant doesn't require a lot of GPU power. However, with our RX 6500 XT, we are getting GPU bound in here on some occasions. There is stuttering in the first few rounds. However, this does stabilize after like 3 or 4 rounds, which is pretty expected with AMD cards. However, our frame rates in here are pretty good, 400 FPS, and we're not GPU bound mostly. apart from when there are a lot of fixed. VRAM is only about 3 gigabytes. GPU power is only really low at 70 watts, and our RX 6500 XT is pretty cool in this game, mid 50s for its temperature. Okay, let's move back to our games which require a lot of graphical capability, and next up is PUBG, and here we have running DX11 Enhanced, and this is actually not bad experience. We're running about 130 FPS, GPU bound of course, and our GPU is hotter than our previous games in here, running about 60, 65 degrees Celsius, and GPU power is pushing close to 90 watts as well. When we're running through the map, it's pretty smooth. Lows are also pretty good at around 100 FPS. There's not much I could say in here. I don't know what has happened. I think the latest patch is actually making the game more smoother than normal. Okay, let's move on to the next game, which is Helldivers 2, and we're back and fighting for managed democracy as they have buffed our weapons. So here we are. This is low settings, 1080p. Now we are limited with our VRAM, so we're going to tweak this, and here we have set our render scale to ultra quality, and you can see the improvements of FPS. Very significant difference between the two, right? So I guess we will probably have to stay with the ultra quality render scale. Okay, let's move down to real gameplay. One thing that I've noticed when I was playing Helldivers 2, it is really stuttering in the loading screen because it maxes out the VRAM in here. However, when we do get on the ground, it seems pretty good. We're able to fight the terminate bugs. Our FPS is not as high. It's around about 80 FPS or 70 FPS, but it's good enough for us to hit those bugs. We are GPU bound again with our RX 6500 XT. VRAM is close to 4 gigabytes and GPU power is about 75 watts. Okay, moment of truth. Here we are comparing the RX 6500 XT 4 gigabyte against its predecessor, which is the RX 5500 XT 8 gigabyte. And first up is Warzone. Let's start with the running shot in here, and you can see that FPS is close enough. We have higher FPS with our RX 6500 XT, but the lows are a little bit lower compared to our RX 5500. It is better in terms of GPU power as well, about like 10 watts difference, and they're both GPU bound in here. Moving on to another DX12 game, Helldivers 2, and in here you can see that this the same scenario, right? A little bit higher FPS for RX 6500 XT. The lows are more or less the same. However, lower GPU power on our RX 6500 XT, lower VRAM usage as well, but that is expected because the RX 5500 XT has higher VRAM capacity compared to the RX 6500 XT. They're more or less the same, right? Tell you what, actually on the effects side, I think the RX 6500 XT handles effects better compared to the RX 5500 XT. Moving on to our fast-paced shooters, Fortnite, and this is where you can see some difference in terms of performance. Now, I know we're both GPU bound in here in performance mode, but you can see that our RX 6500 XT do have better lows and higher average FPS compared to its predecessor. Not a lot, but at least it's better. And in terms of GPU power as well, it is lower, about like 15 watts lower compared to the RX 5500 XT. Let's move on to DX12, and well, the gap has closed between the two, right? So they're both GPU bound as well. The lows still go to the RX 6500 XT. Average FPS is a slight lead on our RX 6500 XT as well. Likewise, the GPU power still goes to the RX 6500 XT. Although it has like higher clock rates, it is more efficient compared to our RX 5500 XT. Another fast-paced shooter is Valorant, and in here it's quite different. It actually favors the older CAD, the RX 5500 XT, compared to our RX 6500 XT. Roughly about 100 FPS, 100 plus FPS difference for our running shots. Even when we go to the heavier action scenes, it's exactly the same. Maybe higher FPS for RX 5500 XT. I'm wondering, maybe it's the PCIe lanes. The RX 6500 XT has 4 lanes compared to 8 lanes on the RX 5500 XT. So yeah, who knows?
PUBG is also very interesting. In here on the running shots where there's literally nothing happening, which it actually favors the RX 6500 XT, where both GPU bound in here and the GPU power is really pushed higher than other games in here, but it favors the RX 6500 XT. Let's see how it goes on our heavier mortar scene. And from the get-go, this is where you can see that it is actually much better, much more stable than our RX 6500 XT. AMD cards has this behavior wherein it loses a lot of FPS during scenes like this, but the RX 6500 XT still retains that lead compared to its predecessors. And obviously we have to address the elephant in the room, which is that the RX 6500 XT just doesn't have an encoder, so you can't use this card for streaming basically, compared to the RX 5500 XT, which comes with built-in encoder. That's the sound side. Obviously there are other caveats with our RX 6500 XT. This said, it requires PCIe 4.0 to perform better, which hopefully it's more prevalent and hopefully shouldn't be an issue. If you're only gaming, like primarily gaming, the RX 6500 XT is actually not a bad choice. Although if you're using the GPU for different things, then this is where the RX 5500 XT might be a better choice for you, especially if you want things to do some recording. I think the results are pretty interesting for our RX 6500 XT, and most specifically in relation to the RX 5500 XT. Now we'll be doing more tests in the upcoming videos. I've got a Ryzen 3700X, which is also a good value option. So if you're interested in that, click the subscribe button. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video.